Now let's go to the big news out of the United Nations, where Australia voted for a successful resolution calling for a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza and the release of all remaining hostages, which no doubt undermines Israel's position and plays into the favor of Hamas, which, let's not forget, is a proscribed terrorist group. As I've been saying for a while, we could have a ceasefire if Hamas just released the hostages and gave up their senior leadership. But no, they're winning the PR war and have countries, including Australia now, looking like doing their bidding. Joining me to get the details on this and work it all through is the Australian newspaper's foreign editor, Greg Sheridan. Greg, thanks so much for coming on Crediline tonight. Tell me about this UN resolution and what does it mean for Australia's international reputation and the conflict in Gaza? Because I have heard that not everybody is thrilled with what Australia did here.
Well, James, great to be with you. Look, it's a very disappointing decision by the Albanese government. We shouldn't underestimate how badly the Albanese government has been thrown off course by losing the voice referendum. They cannot hold a line on anything now. It's not only a bad position, it's an incoherent one because the resolution contradicts the statement that Anthony Albanese issued with Justin Trudeau and the New Zealand Prime Minister. So the resolution calls for an immediate ceasefire and the release of all hostages. Doesn't mention Hamas by name, but an immediate ceasefire, which wouldn't be accompanied by the release of all hostages anyway, would simply leave Hamas in power, having committed the worst atrocity against the Jewish people since Hitler's Holocaust. And that would be a tremendous victory for Hamas. Now, in the statement Albanese put out with Trudeau and Luxon, he said Hamas must lay down its arms, release all hostages, and have no part in the future governance of Gaza. Now, if Hamas did that, you wouldn't need to call for a ceasefire. Israel would stop military operations in a nanosecond. But the thing is, you can't have both. You can't pretend that you're in solidarity with Israel and then call for them to accept defeat. And just incidentally, we're opposed not only to the US, we're opposed to the UK, our AUKUS colleagues, and we're opposed to the majority populations of the South Pacific Forum, who either voted against or abstained.
No, but we're on the same side as, I think, lovely nations such as Russia. But the thing, Greg, that I'd love you to explain to me here is, it seems to me that by switching positions here, Australia is helping to legitimize Hamas, which, of course, is a proscribed terror group. I think it's been proscribed since at least 2022 here in Australia. Does this, in that sense, does suddenly Hamas wind up with a new sort of legitimacy and they get treated as a legitimate actor with legitimate grievances?
Well, you're right, James. There's a very disturbing, ugly kind of moral equivalence which creeps into all the government's languages. So once again, even in the Albanese-Trudeau-Luxon statement, it says we stand against anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and anti-Arab feeling. So, you know, those poor old Arabs who only have a few dozen countries of their own are being persecuted all over the world, apparently. I mean, it's just kind of grotesque. And Hamas is not just a proscribed terrorist organisation. You're certainly right to draw attention to that. But, I mean, any human being who witnessed what happened on October 7 would know that that is equal to the most grotesque, vile, sadistic atrocities the world has ever seen. Now, in fairness to the Albanese government, let me be fair to them, they, without question and without exception, they absolutely condemn Hamas and its actions. So in the explanatory statement at the UN, in Penny Wong's press conference, and in Albanese's Prime Minister's statement, they explicitly and utterly condemn Hamas. But you can't, I mean, the two objectives, you must remove Hamas from Gaza and Israel must immediately stop all military actions, they're not compatible. So if you have both those objectives, you've got to at least be honest enough to tell us which one has priority and why, instead of which the Albanese government tries to speak out of both sides of its mouth at once in the hope that it can appease contradictory audiences.
Well, and Greg, you mentioned those contradictory audiences, and you mentioned how the Albanese government hasn't been able to hold the line on anything since The Voice. Julian Leeser today, the Liberal MP, said that he thought that this was really about Albanese trying to appease voters in Grayndler, his home seat, which has a very large Greens vote. And other people have suggested that also it's about appeasing seats with a high Muslim population in Western Sydney, and also in suburban Melbourne. How much is domestic politics affecting this?
I think this is all domestic politics. I think the Albanese government is proving to be a tremendous disappointment now. It's not doing anything at all on defence. I often rabbit on about that on this program. You know, simple electoral mathematics. There are nearly 900,000 Muslims in Australia, about 100,000 Jews. So the Albanese government is in process of dismounting from its support of Israel and joining up to a more appeasing Muslim opinion position. It's under assault from the Greens. I think Albanese will always hold Grayndler, but I think the Greens are threatening Labor in all kinds of inner city seats. And you can see the dishonest and terrible campaign the Greens will run at the next election. And by the way, I think Labor looks heroic compared to the Greens, but you can see the Greens claiming that Labor is militarist and a patsy for the Americans and is anti-Palestinian and all that. So I think a very big part of this resolution is to try to appease the Arab voters in southwest Sydney and elsewhere, and to safeguard themselves against the obvious attack lines from the Greens at the next election. I mean, the Albanese government has seen Joe Biden's numbers go down as he has supported Israel. So Biden, I'm happy, I'm a very strong critic of Biden on a lot of fronts, but he has been very good on Israel, and he's lost Arab voters and he's lost Gen Z as a result. That's the state that our poor culture is in at the moment. And the Albanese government is not going to go courageously in defence of friends when there are votes on the other side.
Yeah, no, Greg, and I'll tell you what, I'm going to give Joe Biden something I rarely do, but quite a bit of credit for, again, holding the line. But he's part of that generation of Democrats for whom support for Israel has always been a given. And I'm worried about what happens when that younger generation comes up through. And a lot of those younger voters are coming out of institutions like Harvard. And I wanted to just get your thoughts on this before I let you go. We've had all of this controversy at Harvard, UPenn, MIT, but also more broadly across the university campuses in the United States. We're seeing some of that here in Australia as well. It's already taking the scalp of one university president, but it's really revealed to me that this anti-Semitism we're seeing around Israel is just, the sharp, pointy end of this much broader diversity, equity, inclusion, or DEI agenda, which sounds very warm and fuzzy, but is actually very sinister. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on what's happening in the American Academy and what that means to our culture and civilization, and if there's any way we can recover.
Well, James, I think you're absolutely right. This is a very serious matter. The Economist this week has a piece which shows that something like 20% of younger people in America, most of them college educated, don't believe the Holocaust ever occurred.
Shocking.
So we've never had more folks in college, and we've never had more money spent on college education, and yet we've never had greater monstrous disbelief in reality than we're seeing now. And honestly, if you put your kids through a humanities education in Yale or Harvard or any of the Ivy League American universities, they're likely to come out hating the Western tradition, hating the United States, and certainly hating Israel, which they will see as a colonialist and oppressor nation. Now, the way the academies have turned against the West, I mean, it's an irony here. For 2,000 years, Western anti-Semitism despised Jews because they were allegedly alien to the West. Now the contemporary left at campuses despises Jews because they are a representative of the West.
Great point.
They can't win no matter what. But I think the need to clean up the universities, I mean, if the Liberals had the IQ of a boy 10, they would be crusading on education, but they have they've overseen the same woke madness for the 10 years they were in government without doing anything about it. But that's a huge challenge for every Western society. Forget about the money for education. How about we get truth in education?